Welcome to the Indie Author Mentor Show, how, what, and why for the indie author. I'm Valerie Ihsan, author business strategist. I help panicked, paralyzed, and overwhelmed authors get clarity so they can focus on what will bring them success in their author business. Each week on the podcast, I'll talk about successful strategies that authors can use to stay focused, finish their projects, and find success living life the indie author way, one filled with creation, balance, connection, authenticity, and inspiration. Let me help you grow your author business. You can find the episode show notes, a free video on getting focused, confident, and successful, and lots more info at valerieihsan.com. And Ihsan is spelled I-H-S-A-N. And here's the show. Hello, indie authors. I'm Valerie Ihsan, and this is episode 33 of the podcast, and it's April 17th, 2020 as I record this. The main topic today is healthy grieving when things aren't great. First, I want to do a little bit of a personal update. If you listened last week, you will have perhaps remembered that instead of a hard launch of Focus and Finish at valerieihsan.com/focus, I've opened up my schedule to individual coaching sessions to support authors through this weird and unsettling time. A lot of people are unfocused right now, myself included, if I am totally honest. And you might appreciate an opportunity to talk with somebody about what your challenges are, where you're struggling, staying focused, and maybe get a few priorities identified so you can get back to work at home. And this is especially helpful for those people that have a regular schedule that does not involve working at home. So if you haven't worked at home until now, this individual coaching might just be right up your alley to get you back on track. The service isn't offered on my website, but you can go to my scheduler tool at valerieihsan.as.me, Valerie Ihsan as me, that's how I remember it, and you can book a 1-hour session there. And any money I've decided that you spend on individual coaching can go towards your purchase of the signature coaching program, Focus and Finish, if you decide to go that route. I'm reading. In fiction, I'm reading my book, The Scent of Apple Tea, because I want to write a second epilogue for my mailing list. And I need to kind of get back into that mind space of the characters so that I, have a better jumping off point for that second epilogue. And since it's not written yet, I can't say for sure, but I have a really strong feeling that it's going to be about Kyle, because I have another novel that I am working on. It's kind of on sabbatical right now, but that has the potential for Kyle to make a few showings in, and I think it would be neat if he were in both novels as minor characters. But I think that would be a fun Easter egg for readers, and I think this second epilogue might be sort of the what do you want to call it, the way that a bridge for between the two books, I think. So that's sort of my plan. I don't know, we'll see if it turns out that way. In nonfiction, I am reading Better Than Before, Mastering the Habits of Our Everyday Lives by Gretchen Rubin. And I just started that this morning, so more thoughts on that later as I read it. My writing update, I finished going through the hard copy of And Then There Was Me, the memoir I'm working on, doing that macro pass with, the markers. And so what I'm going to do next is put all those changes into my Scrivener document. And then at that point, I can start fleshing out the scenes, making them bigger, working on the transitions and stuff. Sometimes our manuscripts end up, especially during the revision stages, being kind of clunky, chunky, cut and pasty, and it's really important to work on the transitions, once you get to that editing pass. I do several editing passes over my manuscript until it's done. I would say I probably have another 3 passes, maybe 4, before the memoir is done. And this is, I just said it in passing, I don't even know if you noticed, but this is the first time I've mentioned the title to the memoir, which is And Then There Was Me. So I hope that works. I have the cover made for it and everything, so it better work. Otherwise, I'll have to make a new cover with a new title. Okay, this podcast is sponsored by my patrons at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan. I'd like to remind everybody that for as low as $1 a month, especially right now, that $1 a month is vital for small businesses, of which I'm included, to stay afloat. So at the $1 a month tier, you get a shout out on the podcast. Your name will be read out, and you get a monthly connections video. And those are just short little videos that I send once a month to my patrons that have a little bit of extra of me. I'm pretty honest and open on the podcast, but sometimes there's other things that I'm wondering about or thinking about or dealing with that I don't share on the podcast. And that's where I choose to share a little bit more with you in those connection videos. At other tiers, the benefits increase. Those might include free books, free editing, or free coaching. So become a patron of the arts and of me at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN. And because I still have unresolved issues with my the Audacity thing, I can't use Audacity anymore with my Mac. So I have that push goal that I mentioned last week of raising my Patreon support up just another $24. I think I did the math wrong. I think I just need $24 more a month, and I can get this podcasting service called Alitu that will help make my podcast episodes super professional and pretty sounding. And that's the way I would like to present them to you. So tell your friends about the podcast and check out my Patreon page. Consider becoming a patron of the arts and this podcast today, or consider upping your pledge if you're already supporting. Again, thanks so much. I really appreciate that support. For resources, I have a Passion Planner discount code for a 10% off new customers. And I'm going to put the link to that coupon in the show notes, because it's not a bit.ly link. It's some really weird, you'll never remember combination of letters and numbers. And as another little point, also, I am actually giving away an extra passion planner to, I sent out a video to my Patreon supporters. And if you are a Patreon supporter, then get in there and watch that video, because the first person that leaves me a comment is going to get the planner. Okay, we're going to get to the meat of the episode now, healthy grieving when things aren't great. And the reason I chose this topic today is because I'm seeing a lot of people in my writing community talking about, well, not even just the writing community, but friends of mine that aren't writers. They're saying that they're not able to read anymore. They can't stay focused on the words or immerse themselves in the stories anymore. And that's especially, saddening right now, because now is the time they want to escape and they want to relax into a book. And that's a way that they are managing that stress and grief of the coronavirus, this global pandemic that we're in. So being in a global pandemic, as you can imagine or live right now and know for yourself, is very stressful. And whether you're at risk of getting the virus or not, the change in our routines and our circumstances are what's stressful. And stress and grief do go hand in hand, or they can. So that's why I wanted to give you some tips on how to grieve in healthy ways during these uncertain times. So just some general information about grief. Also, just so you know that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to grief. I am a certified bereavement facilitator, which really only means that I can run support groups and grief support groups. I'm not a counselor in the state of Oregon, but I do know about grief. I've lived grief, and I am a certified bereavement facilitator. So just a little bit about grief in general. Everybody grieves, first of all, and there's big griefs and little griefs. And the big griefs, as you might imagine, are death and divorce and serious illness or dealing with a global pandemic. Moving is also a pretty big grief. Even if it's something, that you want to do and are excited about it, there's still a grief process that you go through, when you're moving, because that's a big deal. That's a big stressor. And little griefs are more like your massage appointment got canceled and you really needed that massage, or maybe you broke a really important memento and you just feel super sad about that. But, it's just a thing and it's small, and, that's a little grief. The grief process itself can be long or it can be short. And there are good griefs too. There is good stress, like I mentioned before, like moving to a new place that you want to go to, or getting a new job, or maybe your family is coming for a nice long visit and you've missed them and you're really looking forward to it. So good griefs still equal stress in the body. So, and therefore, any stress is a grief. And so some of the signs that you are grieving are also the signs that you are under stress or that you're suffering from depression. And those are trouble concentrating, like we talked about at the beginning, not being able to read anymore. So trouble concentrating, fatigue, insomnia, that's a big one. Irritability, that's super easy to slip into. Maybe even in your body, aches and pains that just don't go away. Digestive problems are really common, and just that general sadness too. So, okay, in your body, what's happening in your body? So this is a quote from just webmd.com. When you feel threatened, a chemical reaction occurs in your body that allows you to act in a way to prevent injury, fight or flight. That's stress response. During stress response, your heart rate increases, breathing quickens, muscles tighten, and blood pressure rises. You've gotten ready to act. It's how you protect yourself. Our bodies are not designed to handle small doses of stress, we are designed to handle small doses of stress, but we are not equipped to handle long-term chronic stress without ill consequences. My computer mouse is really being silly. So, grief is stressful. So when you feel prolonged stress, you are going to be going through a grief process. Around the world, this is really interesting to me. I did a little bit of research just for my own sanity when I was going through a pretty heavy grief cycle myself, that there are different grieving rituals around the world. Of course, in North America, you've got a funeral or a wake or a burial or cremation. That's kind of the ritual that happens when someone dies in North America. But in the Deep South, they have this New Orleans jazz funeral, which sounds really powerful and moving. And that's where there's dancing and music and parade. I took a grief ritual workshop at Brighton Bush in Detroit, Oregon many years ago, and the woman that was teaching it, I forget her name, Sabonfu Some, I think she's from Burkina Faso, and she taught us a grief ritual that involved fire and drums and witnesses standing, by the entrance to this, I don't know, not really shrine, but well, to the fire, really. They stood there and witnessed people coming to the fire to grieve. And having someone witness your grief is also surprisingly powerful and moving, and not something that I thought I really wanted to do. Being vulnerable in front of people, whether they're strangers or not, felt really icky, like dangerous, not wanting to, not feeling like I was in a safe place. But surprisingly, having someone there to witness you grieving something and crying about something was actually very strengthening and empowering and nurturing too. So I was happy to have gone through that ritual and learned it. I went to India several years ago, and I was just in a car, and we had a driver there, and we stopped in the street because this wagon was coming through the intersection, and there was music, and it was all colorfully painted and flowers and garlands, and it looked like so happy, and I wanted to take pictures of it, and the driver said no pictures, because it was kind of a funeral in a way. It was honoring that the person that had died had a long life, a long and happy life. So they were celebrating that. And then in my book, The Scent of Apple Tea, Heather does this ritual that is a Japanese custom, where they put a flower, I think it's called an anemone, maybe, I don't know, I forget the name of the flower, in a little paper boat and send it out on the water, as a way of saying goodbye and of letting go and new beginnings, and that's really beautiful. So maybe in your traditions and in your ancestry, you've got some rituals that you do that help you kind of mark the passing of this strange and weird time and sad time, whether it's because someone died or because you're dealing with having to stay home with your kids and you have no moment alone to get your head on straight and try to work. I know in some places, in some families, if someone dies, they cover the mirrors or they stop the clocks. So it might be interesting for you to kind of go back through your past and or anything from what you've read about other cultures and recognize that sometimes trying on a new ritual helps move like physically through that grief or stress. What else? I think that if you are dealing with stressful relationships, like we talked about, your kids being home and underfoot, or working at home with your spouse when you haven't ever had to do that before, those can cause stress because it's a difference in our routine, and communication is really important in those times. And any time that we're stressed out or grieving, or in a depression, trying to communicate is really so important. And communication, on the flip side too, is really more about listening than anything else. So if someone feels heard, they're actually going to listen to you more. So that's an interesting dynamic. Questions that you might want to ask someone that you're trying to help. You could ask them what scares them. That might be really empowering for them to share what scares them, and then you can practice those listening skills and helping them to feel heard, and that might be all that is needed to move them through that stress response. You could ask them what worries them, what they're most sad about, what they need right then. That's really important, because maybe it's not at all what you think. And then what do they want right now, which could be totally different than what they need. It really might surprise you, the answers that you get. It's a perfect time to acknowledge to yourself and to anyone that is going through this with you that this dynamic of maybe being at home with your kids or with your spouse aren't what either of you expected. It might be really crappy right now or even horrible, but having some mutual respect and comfort are, of course, the goals, and then also coming to a new understanding. So another thing that we can do to grieve in healthy ways is to have a mindset shift and not feel any guilt. That's a big one, because when my husband died, I felt like I was grieving wrong, that I wasn't doing it right. And that made me feel guilty because I thought, well, I must not have loved him enough if I'm not grieving in this particular way, which of course is not true at all. What you're feeling is not wrong. It just is, and everybody grieves differently. So bypassing the mind, if you can, it really gets in the way. Finding a medium like writing or playing with the garden right now, it's in some states, it's perfect for gardening. And then, once your fingers are in the dirt or in the clay or on the page or whatever, then just trying to let your mind go. And that might help in that mindset shift. Something else that I learned in my own personal research that I thought was really interesting is it's grief versus mourning, and then the different types. So grief is the emotional response that you have to whatever has happened, to the stress. Mourning is the outside expression of that grief. And so everybody grieves differently, but everybody mourns differently too. And there's a book called Disenfranchised Grief by Dr. Kenneth Doka, D-O-K-A. And he said that there are different types of mourners. So there's an intuitive grief, intuitive griever. And that's that outward expression of emotion, crying in the grocery store, trying to pick out toothpaste and you just start crying. Like that's an intuitive type of griever. Then there's the instrumental griever, and those are the doers. Those are the ones that really have to be active, like building a memorial garden or planting a tree or, something that represents something that's important to you in that time of stress or grieving. Then there's the blended types of grievers, which are a little bit of both. And that's where I slot myself. I find that I'm definitely an emotive, intuitive griever. I, cry easily, but I also really feel called to be doing something too. And I think that's why journaling is really important to me, because it's me doing something active with my hands while I'm trying to process that intuitive, emotional grief. And then there's the dissonant grievers, which is someone that has an outward expression that's different from their inward expression, which actually, come to think of it, was me too when my husband died, because I felt like I was doing it wrong. I thought I should be doing it in this particular way, and I wasn't. So my inward, well, that's not true, actually. I'm going to take that back. I never expressed differently than what I was feeling. I think a dissonant griever is more like somebody that is told to grieve in a specific way. Like, back in the day when men weren't supposed to cry. So if they have an internal expression of grief being to cry, but they aren't allowed to from societal input, then that would be a dissonant griever. Something that I find helpful when I'm trying to be healthy in my grieving and in my stress times, or when I find myself slipping into depression, I like noting what my personal red flags are. So if you know what your red flags are, then you can kind of catch that wave before it gets unhealthy. So my red flags are eating sugar, negative self-talk, watching Netflix a lot, and maybe those are some things that you're doing right now to deal with the pandemic stress. And that's not bad and that's not wrong, but if you feel like it's becoming a little bit too deep or dark, then maybe that's a red flag. Like, there's nothing wrong with Netflix, but if you watch 4 movies in one day because you can't do anything else, well, maybe that's a red flag. So just notice them, and then ultimately the goal then is to choose another healthier strategy. Instead of alcohol or drugs, maybe it could be, I don't know, taking a walk or something like that with your mask on. So the object, I think, for me, is to shorten the time between noticing them and choosing a new, healthier alternative activity. Ways that we can manage our grief and stress is by sleep. Your nutrition. These are all just pretty common sense ones, but it pays to hear them again, for me anyway. I need to be reminded to sleep. I need to be reminded to take my supplements and vitamins and eat healthy. I need to stay connected to people, even if, my knee-jerk reaction is to go inward and not be around people. And right now we can't be around people physically, but I can still stay connected to my friends through Zoom calls and talking on the phone. And then, of course, movement. And being stuck at home, not being able to go to the gym, means I've started an at-home yoga practice, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I'm actually quite happy about that. And I do that probably 3 times a week. And then the other 3 days of the week or 4, I'm taking walks with my husband down by the river, by the island park where I live. So that's been really special and helps mitigate that stress and grief response and lack of focus. So maybe those can be something that make you feel better as well. So self-care, I think, is anything that makes you feel better. And again, we're in the healthy vein here. So for me, it's journaling, massage, walking in nature, maybe having a bubble bath or sitting in the hot tub with or without said wine. Maybe joining an online book club would be perfect for you right now. Meditation and yoga, of course, help me. And then just personal rituals. I get up at a certain time in the morning and I feed the dogs and I make tea and I sit down and I journal every morning. And that's kind of a personal ritual that helps me stay grounded and makes me feel in a normal headspace if I'm not in a normal, day-to-day routine. So maybe you can come up with some personal rituals yourself, like that tea and journaling, or maybe it's giving yourself a pedicure, or having some sort of grieving ritual on anniversaries. I have a friend right now that is posting a song every day that he's in quarantine. Well, he's not technically in quarantine, but in our stay home, stay safe order from the governor of Oregon, he's been posting a song on Facebook every day. And they all have some sort of thematic resonance with having stress and grief. And it's his way, I think, of processing, the emotions that he has being, lonely and being at home. So having some sort of ritual like that could be really good and healthy. So sometimes it's great to have that project. If you're kind of a doer person and you want to get busy, you could still be, even though, again, we can't go to the gym, we can still be training by working out at home, training for some event that you want to get ready for in the future, like a marathon or something. Maybe you can raise money for a charity. You could build that memorial garden or work on an art project. You could make a book of letters that you'll never send because you're angry at somebody and you want to say what you want to say, or maybe somebody's died and you don't have a chance to say it to them, so you can still write it in a letter and make that book of letters. So, yeah, what do you do? Those are some of the things that I do. I think communicating, we talked about, staying connected, keep a routine, incorporate self-care and stress management strategies, moving your body, sleeping enough, eating wholesome foods. It's really the fuel for us. It's the fuel that would get you through this not what you expected time. So I hope that those suggestions, those tips, just those things to think about are useful in trying to stay healthy through the grieving part of this global pandemic. And thanks for listening. I hope you did find it useful. If you did find this podcast episode or this podcast in general useful, tell your friends about the podcast, please, and consider becoming a patron of the arts and of this podcast. Or upping your pledge if you're already a supporter at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN. And don't forget, if you want to help getting focused so that you can finish your writing, marketing, and publishing projects, go to ValerieIhsan.com to get a free video on how to start. And if you want to connect, you can find me in my Facebook group, the Indie Author Mentor, or on Instagram at Valerie Ihsan, IHSAN. Until next time.